The next day, Yoko and Julian sat down together with Sean. In the end, we both talked to him, Julian told me. We told him Daddy was dead. And when he finally understood, he burst into tears, and I cuddled him. I told him the man who killed our dad would go to court. Sean said, "Do you mean a tennis court or a basketball court?" I said, "No, it's a different kind of court." The morning after Sean was told, Julian was asked to go to Yoko's room. She suggested he might like a friend to keep him company, an offer he accepted gratefully, and asked for Justin. The whole thing was arranged speedily, and Justin was soon in New York. Then she came up with the idea that Fred should take Julian and Justin to the house at Cold Spring Harbor on Long Island that she and John had bought the previous year. She thought it might be nicer for them to be away from the crowd surrounding the Dakota building. She and Sean would join them later, so Sean didn't have to see the crowds gathered outside their home for the silent vigil in memory of John on December the 14th. 100,000 people gathered in Central Park, next to the Dakota. All normal radio and television programs were suspended so that people around the world could take part. In the Long Island house, Yoko forbade anyone to put on the TV or radio to protect Sean from what was going on. Julian slipped quietly to his room and lay on his bed while the vigil was in progress to think about his father. After a week or two, Julian wanted to come home, but Yoko asked him to stay on to join her at the groundbreaking ceremony for the Strawberry Field site. This was a section of Central Park opposite the Dakota building, which was to be dedicated to John's memory. The ceremony would take place in front of a gathering of the world's press, and Yoko urged Julian to be there, for the sake of family unity, and even asked him to wear John's cap and scarf. Julian felt under pressure and agreed, hoping it would improve relations between the different sides of John's family. He hated every moment of it and couldn't wait to get inside and tear off the cap and scarf. Wearing his father's things in public was too painful for him, and he felt that in asking him to wear them, Yoko was not only wanting him to look like John, but was also trying to make it appear that she and Julian were close. This was far from true. In fact, he felt she had little interest in him. Before Julian left, Yoko offered both him and Sean one of John's guitars. Julian asked for one he had always loved, a black Yamaha inlaid with a pearl dragon. He remembered John playing Sean's songs on it. Yoko told him he couldn't have that one and gave him two others instead, which sadly he didn't recognize and which therefore had no meaning for him. These were the only possessions of John's Julian was ever given, yet when he returned to the Dakota building on another occasion, he saw that Sean had the full use of all John's musical equipment, including the guitar Julian had wanted. Julian was home in time for Christmas. I had been anxious about him the whole time he was in New York and was relieved to have him home. But he was despondent and unhappy, not only because his father had died, but because he had found Yoko's attitude hurtful. Her behavior over John's possessions was indicative to him how little interest Yoko had in him, and he felt that he had only been asked to go to New York because it would have looked bad otherwise. We knew that John had left a will, but had no idea of its terms. However, I was certain that John would have left Julian a financial legacy. Whatever his faults as a father, he had loved Julian and would have wanted to ensure that he was recognized as his son and provided for. It was inconceivable to me that he would neglect this duty. My only worry was that because John had no interest in legal matters and always left them to others, he might not have made sure things were as straightforward as possible. Eventually we were told that John had left his fortune, then considered to be well in excess of £100 million, and subsequently increased to several hundred million, to Yoko and the issue of John and Yoko, Julian, Sean and Kyoko. The trustees were Yoko and the Lennons' lawyers. We expected that it would take some time for the terms of the will to be fulfilled, but when after 1 year or more nothing had happened, we asked our lawyers to investigate. They advised us that because Yoko and her lawyers were the trustees of the fund, whether or not Julian got any money was in their hands. John's death hit me and Julian hard. I was grieving for the man I had loved as a husband and partner, Julian for the father he never really knew and needed so badly. For some months he appeared to be spiraling out of control, and I worried about him. He was angry with me, blaming me for the breakup with John, for not being stronger, for not making him behave like a proper father. He wanted to push me away, and I understood, but it still hurt. There was little comfort for us in seeing John's killer jailed. John's death had been so unnecessary, and for both of us, the hardest part of losing him was the loss of hope. For me, that we would one day be friends again, able to laugh together, enjoy past memories, and talk about the son we both loved. And for Julian, that he and John would become close, understand each other, and spend time together. I knew that Julian's loss was by far the greater one. I had had something wonderful with John that I could always look back on. But Julian lost the possibility that John would make up to him for past neglect and become the father he had always wanted. By this time my marriage to John Twist had collapsed, and I had to sell the bistro, bring Mum to live with me and make tough decisions about my future. But I wasn't in any state to make decisions. Both Julian and I were in a low state. We had both been knocked off course by John's death and floundered, each trying to find a new sense of direction and purpose. I knew that I'd get myself back on track, but I wanted to help Julian find some direction in his life. There was nothing for him in North Wales. He had helped out in the bistro for a while, but other than that he was hanging around or being chased around town by the local bullies who singled him out for being John's son and were unable to believe that he wasn't secretly stinking rich. As he wanted to go into the music business, I rang a few old contacts. I had thought George Martin might be able to give him a job, even if it was just making tea in the studios, but he couldn't. After a few more false starts, I got in touch with Elton John's percussionist, Ray Cooper. "Send him to me," Ray said. "I'll put him up for a few months and introduce him to a few people." So Julian, now 18, was packed off to London to find his musical direction. For a while things seemed uncertain. After 6 months with Ray, who gave him all sorts of valuable introductions, Julian got his own flat. Eventually the press got wind of who he was, and stories began to appear in the papers. Nightclubs began to offer him free entry, knowing that he was a magnet for the press, and plenty of other bad boy stories appeared. The impression was that Julian, if not going off the rails, was certainly enjoying his share of youthful wild living. There were regular items in the papers about him, and various girls, mostly blonde models, who confessed their love for so shy Julian. I laughed at most of it, knowing it was wildly exaggerated. Julian phoned me regularly to reassure me that he wasn't actually dating every dizzy blonde he was pictured with. From the stories in the papers, the public might have concluded that Julian was John's spoilt, millionaire playboy son. In fact, nothing could have been further from the truth. Soon after Julian had given an interview saying he had no money, Yoko agreed to give him an allowance of $100 a week, which she called beer money, and said was quite enough for a young man of his age. She insisted that he would only blow it if he had more. But Julian found it humiliating to take handouts from her when he felt he should already have received a share of his father's estate. I was angry too. It wasn't that I wanted Julian to be rolling in money. If he had received a share of John's, I'd have wanted him to invest it for the future or contribute to good causes, rather than just spend it. But the point was not what Julian might or might not do with the money. It was that John had wanted him to have it. Our lawyers continued in their attempts to resolve this, and Julian carried on writing songs in London.